Hello, everyone. Welcome to CG Industry Talk. Our guest today needs no special introduction because his work speaks for himself. The internet has been raving about his latest short film, Irradiation. We hope you have seen it, but if you didn't, please do. Sava Živković has been generous with sharing not only his work, but also behind-the-scenes process for every of his short film. And now we are thrilled to have him for the third time at the CGA. This time he claims that Unreal has set him free. So Sava, please tell us more about it. And what does it mean that you won't be making any new shorts?
What does it mean that I won't what?
You won't be making any new shorts.
Hopefully I will.
Maybe I misheard.
No. Hopefully I will, and especially now that things have opened up. I mean, I would like to make more long-format films as well, but I think especially now with Unreal, the market opened itself up way more than it has before. So, yeah.
You can tell us about the project itself.
I mean, I can just dive into presentation immediately, or do you want to have a little bit of an introduction before that? Or?
We can do a short introduction,
cool.
Okay?
All right, well, I'll just dive in. So welcome, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the organization for having me again. I'm a big fan of CGA, and I'm very, very happy to be back, especially after the whole, we all know what happened last year. So I'm going to be talking about today about how filmmaking in Unreal Engine has set me free. And it's a big, fat statement that I hope that after this talk, it'll make it a bit clear why I think this incredible tool is some of the best things that have happened, basically, in this industry since, like, ever. I do have to apologize ahead of time. Every time I do presentations like this, it always comes to the last few days, so apologies for kind of being ill-prepared, but hopefully you'll kind of get the message. And if not, I have a 10-minute video which explains everything that I'm going to be talking about today, much better and much shorter, with much less ums and ums, so you can always watch that later if I make a fool out of myself today. So just briefly, my name is Sava Živković. I'm a director working primarily in CG animation. I work with a UK-based studio called Access Studios, where we mostly work in directing CG animated trailers, game cinematics. This is some of the work that I've done over the years at Access, but in my free time, what I love doing the most is my own personal short films. These are some that I've done over the years, and in each one I've kind of explored the various different facets of CG animation and filmmaking. And today we're going to be talking about one of the latest short films that I've done called Irradiation. And this short film is the first one that I've done with, I messed something up. This is the first one that I've done utilizing Unreal Engine. This whole talk is going to be focusing about the process of making Irradiation. So just a quick show of hands, who has actually seen the film before? All right, that's good. So we're going to play it now.
Again.
We're going to play it now. Just for context, it'd be weird talking about it if you guys haven't seen it. But also, I know this is streamed online. Is that correct? So online is probably going to be choppy. The film is live on my Vimeo channel, and you can find it on Shorts of the Week on YouTube as well. So you can watch it at your own leisure time. But we're going to play the film now. It's a bit of a longer one, but we'll get into how it was made after this.
Пойдем. Нас там ждут.
Я знал, что будет плохо. Но чтобы так...
Дыши. Нам еще прилично идти.
Ты это видел?
Так вот, где они хранили машины. Пойдем, мы уже близко. Но не отставай больше, Евгений. Сосредоточься на дыхании и держись ближе.
Погоди. Я видел.
Вот мы и пришли. К сожалению, у меня нет времени объяснять. Нужно приблизиться к аномалии.
Что? Нет, я на это не подписывался. Нербек.
Ты должен это сделать. Вся страна на тебя рассчитывает, Евгений.
Нет, нет, пожалуйста.
credits play out because I do want to acknowledge all the amazing people and artists that have helped make this film possible. And it's only a few more seconds. And my good friend who composed the track would kill me if we turned down the volume just now. It's gone. Anyway. All right. So, in essence, Irradiation is a film that tells a story of a scientist who volunteers to examine a mysteriously irradiated site, but while being escorted to that site, he experiences strange visions along the way. That's what's happening on the surface level, but unfortunately today we're not going to be talking about the story of the film or where it came from or how, what's the deeper meaning of the film. That's for you to hopefully experience yourself and come to your own conclusions. But we're going to be focusing more on the actual kind of quote-unquote technical filmmaking processes behind the creation of the short film and how Unreal Engine has completely changed the way that I approach animated short films now as opposed to even like a year ago. So I'm going to start with something that I call the cinematography problem. And essentially, I've been trying to make images move for a little over 13 years. I studied architecture or interior design and furniture at Belgrade Faculty of Applied Arts, and that's where I got introduced to animation, and I've been diving in ever since. And I've always loved animation, I always loved film. That's why I kind of went into animation. That was kind of my shortcut to becoming a filmmaker in a way. And apart from the kind of the high-level creative stuff of creating a short film, like writing, directing, all of that stuff, cinematography is probably one of my favorite aspects of filmmaking, by far. But the cinematography problem that I'm going to be talking about today is specifically tied with CG animation and how typical processes in CG animation differ, for example, from live action. So briefly explaining the rough outline of the whole process, if you're familiar with CG or not, you start off with something that's called a previs or pre-visualization, where you make very rough 3D animatics with placeholder everything. But that's your first kind of like building blocks of everything that's going to come later. And once that's done, you spend a lot of time on modeling everything, on basically production. You're making all of the characters, all the environments, you're texturing, you're sculpting everything. You have to rig your characters, you have to animate them, and then you get into lighting. Then, like 5 months down the line, once everything is done, you actually get to lighting and rendering. And if you look at this, like basically you have your previs, which is your main camera work, basically. It's the equivalent of blocking on live action. That's where you're finding your shots, your compositions in the geometrical sense. You know where your characters are, you know where the environment is, you know what you're making, and you're making your edit. And the main creative part of working in animation happens in the previs. There's a lot of work that happens after that, but your filmmaking part happens in previs, basically. That's where you need to make all of your shots. That's where you need to make your edit work, and everything that happens next is just following those building blocks. But as you can see here, you have a gap of, you have your previs, which is basically your like shot composition, and then you have your lighting, which happens like 5 months down the line. And that's a vast difference because in live action, you get lighting for free, quote unquote. That's one of the key, most integral parts of cinematography is lighting. You're composing your shots not just purely towards geometry, you're composing them to light. Is your character rimlit? Is your character toplit? Of course, in live action, you can move those things around and mold the lighting per shot, but there's a lot of freedom in doing that in live action where you would be on a live action set or a location and you would see things that you just wouldn't plan for. You still have to go in live action shoots as well. You still have to go in with a solid plan of what you want to execute. But when you get to the set or to a location, there's a lot of things that you just didn't think of before. You might see something, oh shit, there's an awesome looking tree, and maybe if I place my character in a certain way against that tree, maybe that means something for the story. And it's that kind of fun process of discovery that you sort of get for free in live action. But in animation, you never had that. In animation, everything has to be very, very particularly pre-planned ahead of time in the previous stage. So that's a big, big gap. And I'm going to use the examples of one of my previous short films, Freight, I'm going to use the example of kind of how it typically looks just to explain the process a bit further. So if we can play this video, production, please. This is usually how it looks like. So this is like 3ds Max, and this is usually like the previous process. As you can see, it's very rough. It's just like placeholder assets, placeholder animations, placeholder environments. Everything is very, very rough. This is basically your, it should be playing. It is. This is basically your kind of 3D equivalent of a sketch, right? Like you're just sketching things out, but you're nailing the ideas. Like the idea is there. I want to frame this character against these vast openings because that has some meaning for a story. This is where you get to create all of your decisions. But you can see kind of how sterile it is, kind of how uninspiring it is to just rotate around this bland grayscale environment. And sure, if we can play the next video, please, you can make it look a little nicer. So this is still in 3ds Max. There we go. So this is still in 3ds Max, a little bit advanced, but still it's, you know, it's very visually and inspiring, kind of how your actual, from a purely cinematography perspective, it's not the nicest thing to look at when you're thinking of kind of creative ways to, you know, compose your shots. And sure, again, you can do some lighting, but this is not actual lighting, and it's all very rough and very, very uninspiring. And if we can play the next video, this is basically an kind of a sped up process. So once you have your previs, this is what happens. And this here is roughly around 4 months of work to model everything, texture everything, animate, basically make everything to get to this stage. And if you can play this video, please. To get to this stage, which is this is the lighting stage. And this is what I described previously. Like this is literally 4 months down the line once you actually have everything made. Can we play the video, please? There we go. So this is usually how it looks. This is a sped up video. It's not as interactive. Redshift is awesome, but it's not that awesome. Basically, this is how lighting looks. And because everything is, you've made your film in the layout or in the previous stage. You've made all of your choices. Your edit is locked. Your cameras are locked. Your environments are locked. There's very little room to make changes. All you can do is kind of mold the lighting to your existing scene. You can't explore. Like there's no exploring. There's no, oh, this is interesting over there. I'm going to shoot over there. Everything is pre-made. And if you played this video, please. This sort of shows that. Like this is examples of a couple of projects. If we can play the video. This is the example of a couple of projects where it's like previous, bottom left, final image, big screen. And this is kind of how it looks like. So it's a lot of, you know, like it works. That the animation has been doing that for years because it's always been constrained by the kind of the real-time aspect of it. And this is by far the most efficient way of working, but it's become a little bit stale to me, honestly. And after years and years of doing this, I've kind of grown tired of it a little bit. And I needed to try something different. I needed to try a process that is not so rigidly controlled by the previs, but it's a little bit more reactive to the performances and reactive to the process of filmmaking instead of being very, very driven by something that's very pre-planned so early on. You've kind of guessed it, but this is where Unreal Engine comes into play and why I'm so, like Evgeny, why I'm so actually absolutely in love with the software. So if we play the next video, compared to what we've seen in 3ds Max or traditional previs methods, this is how it looks in Unreal Engine. In Unreal Engine, everything is completely real-time and right in front of you. You're seeing everything. You're seeing texture, you're seeing reflections, shadows. You're seeing the light in all of its glory bouncing off of complex animations and complex materials and surfaces. And this experience fills you with tons of additional ideas, ideas you wouldn't normally have while working in like a traditional 3D software. And you might see a shadow that you weren't planning on, but this shadow is kind of nice, like it kind of makes a nice composition. Or you might see a puddle, and maybe that puddle is reflecting your character, and maybe showing the character through that puddle has a deeper meaning for your story. but try finding that puddle via traditional means. It's just not the same. So just in this brief outline of how it kind of works, you immediately see the amount of freedom you get to kind of explore and to play and to find things that you just normally wouldn't plan on via kind of typical methods, I'd say. So just going back a little bit, kind of how this project actually started, and this kind of perfect storm type scenario that made the project possible. So if you play this video real quick, please. Basically, a friend of mine called Jama Jurabayev, who's an amazing concept artist for films and games, he has this company called Big Medium Small, and they make a bunch of assets for concept art or for 3D artists. They're basically an asset store. A while ago, we talked about the potential kind of collaboration where we were just supposed to make a 1-minute trailer for his asset company, basically, that was going to be using Unreal Engine and showcasing their new kind of merging with Unreal Engine, I guess, or making the assets for Unreal Engine. But as soon as I started working on this, and as soon as I started kind of writing some outlines, it was very apparent that there was a larger story at place, and that this short, like 1-minute trailer just didn't seem fitting for me. Furthermore, there's like their tagline of the company is they help people tell stories with their assets. So I thought there's really no better way to support that than by actually making a narrative-driven short film. So convincing Jama to go from 1 minute to 9 minutes was an easier task than I would have initially imagined. But that was like the opening to kind of how this project started. The second thing that really made the project possible is the collaboration with my friends from Take One, which is a local motion capture and animation studio from Belgrade. And I worked with them for years, but right at the time when I was kind of finishing up the script and prepping for the shoot, we would have done the project together anyway, but when I reached out, they were actually, at the same time, they were going through like an Unreal Engine journey of their own. They were, if we play this video, there we go. Sorry, I'm used to kind of having the controls here and scrubbing back and forth, but now it's a little bit hard trying to adjust. But they've recently gone through updating their studio to full Unreal Engine and remote shoot capabilities because of the wonderful COVID times that we find ourselves in. And this is like an example of a meta-human running completely real time on their stage with facial and body performance as well. And what was kind of incredible here is that we've worked together like a few times before. I mean, I've actually worked with them since 2017. But this is the first time that we were able to use Unreal Engine on the stage, which is just such a, again, incredible experience in its own right. Similar to the previous stage, with traditional mocap, your actors see themselves as kind of gray placeholder rigs or models just up on a screen. But with Unreal Engine, you can actually, like, they see themselves in a completely lit environment with all textures, all the materials, with a very indicative look of what the final film is going to look like. And they can see, you know, they can see the constraints of the design. They can see kind of how everything works. They have a lot more visual stimuli than just gray placeholder backgrounds. And sure, you can bring other visual stimuli. You can bring references. You can bring renders. You can bring concept art. But it's a completely different feeling when you can actually see yourself move in this completely virtual space. The other thing which was incredible is the use of a virtual camera. And this is something that's, in motion capture, you're typically recording like a whole master, let's call them like that, masters of action. Like you're not shooting on a shot-by-shot basis like a film. You're shooting on a whole action, and then you're cutting that up later on in animation because it's just much more efficient to do that. But what this approach tends to do is it neglects, you're not looking at the performance in the context of the shot like you would in a film. If you're shooting live action film, you would be looking at your monitor, what your camera is seeing, and you would be judging your performances of the actors strictly through the shot context. But in motion capture, you don't really do that, and it's always been more akin to theater because it's such a wide, you know, you're looking through the context of the whole performance. But what virtual camera changes, and see my video ended, what virtual camera changes is you actually have the ability to frame up your shots on the stage to the sort of final environment and you can actually frame up your shots and look at your performances in the context of the shot. And that was, again, like such a different experience. It's not something that I would use yet, and we definitely didn't use it in this short. We didn't shoot it like that. We shot it traditionally, but it helps so much with kind of the creative thinking of how you're gonna be looking at those performances. Because if you know your shot is wide, you're gonna be looking at that wide. You're not gonna be going in and staring at the close-up of the facial performance of your actor if they're 50 meters away. So it's just another, again, powerful and incredible experience of having this experience on an actual mocap stage and being reactive to everything around you. So after I've had all the animations and all the assets, which is one of the awesome things that really helped this project, is usually everything is kind of custom made, but for this one, the project relied heavily on pre-made assets, basically. So all of the characters, all of the environments, that's all from big, medium, small. The forest came from Mavi. You can grab all of that from Epic Megastore, however you call it. But basically, like, this is how it used to look like, and it used to suck. Like I say, I love animation. I do love animation, but making animation is freaking hard. And with Unreal, though, it's kind of different. It's kind of like this. And it just works. It takes a while to get to this point, to be this happy little kid, but it really does feel like that when you actually kind of go through some hoops. So if we play this video, this is the last one, I promise. This is how it looks like. So again, compare this to what we've seen before at the start. You have your performances, you have your environments, and everything is there. And you get to react to everything. You get to see all of your characters moving. You get to see all the reflections, shadows, all the effects, pretty much everything you need. And you just get to explore. You get to fly around with your camera until you see something that clicks with your shot ideas, and you just take it from there. And you can get your idea out fairly quickly, but you still get the time to play and to explore different things. Even though this experience is incredible, and even though it's kind of like it allows you to play, it allows you to be much freer than previously, you still have to have a plan. As a filmmaker, you need to have a very clear vision of what's the film, what are you trying to capture on a shoot day. You never just turn up on a shoot day with like, all right, we'll figure it out. You always have to have a plan. And this isn't as rigid as being driven completely by the previs, but you have to have at least a shot list and at least an idea of what's the shots that you're trying to capture that day. So I've started by following closely my my initial pass of shot list that I always make alongside with my scripts. But then once you get them out, it's very easy to just go in and play around, find different angles, find completely different ideas that you didn't even think of because you saw something like this. And again, like this is kind of how easy it is to actually find shots, or kind of like I like this composition because it was backlit and it had all these leading lines. And animating with camera is super easy because you're not waiting for play blast like you are in 3D software. Everything is real time. So there's your camera with just a couple of keyframes and like a camera shake modifier. And then I like this because of lighting, but you can change the lighting really quickly if you want to. You can rotate the sun, or you can add a soft top light, or you can add a rim light. But oh shit, maybe that's too much now, dial it back. Maybe this is not as naturalistic as it needs to feel because we're in the outside. And these are all the questions that you're constantly dealing with in animation, but this is completely real time. In offline render engines, you have to press render and you have to wait for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you see, okay, well, not that. And here you can just make all of the decisions and all of the changes completely intuitively, kind of at the speed of thought in a way. But that's not all. Like if you want to change, you like this because of composition, but you want to change something, you can do that. You can add more foliage, you can just duplicate, scale, rotate, add a couple of mountains in the back to have more leading lines to drive to your characters. Again, all of that stuff is very typical animation workflow that you do in any software, but again, in Unreal, you get to do this in your completely lit environments in complete real time, which is incredibly powerful. And because I can't keep up with my video, as hard as I try, you can furthermore, you can actually create a very, very cheap actual virtual camera for your home office with just an HTC Vive tracker and a couple of base stations. And it works surprisingly well as a solution you can just have at your home, which is something that a couple of years ago you'd need a studio for that. And you can just buy a couple of gaming devices and have this amazing camera track system in your house. Another thing that, just going back from there, is how Unreal has completely changed, well, not really completely, it's just a different mindset, but how it kind of changed and how big of an impact it had on my editing process. Again, editing traditionally is done very early on in your previs stage. And again, it's always that same question of it not being an inspiring process because you're editing to something that's very ugly looking, to grayscale models, to placeholder assets. But with Unreal, and yeah, in typical animation, once you have your edit, you're basically just working to that. You're not changing it. You might change certain shots a little bit, but your edit is kind of locked from the very start. And there's no way in traditional animation that you're going to be rendering shots longer unless you're kind of crazy. Because rendering is super expensive. If you have your previs and if your shot is 3 seconds in previs, you're going to render 3 seconds. You're not going to render 5 seconds of that shot because you might want to change something later on. You could, but it's expensive, and I've done it, and it sucks. But in real time, in Unreal, because everything is free, kind of, in terms of rendering, you can render everything. Like, even though some of my shots were like 5 seconds, I've rendered out like 20-second versions of those shots just because I could. You just press render, and 5 seconds later, you get your shot. And what that allows you to do is, again, it goes back to the similar way of working in live action. In live action, you would have your master shot, you would have your master setup, but then you would set up individual shots and basically shoot for coverage. Shoot for wides, shoot for close-ups, shoot for inserts. And with all that coverage, the more coverage you have, the more different angles of your actors you have, the more room you have in the editing to construct your scenes in the way you desire. So in traditional animation, that will have to be done way early with the previs stage. And again, as discussed, previs sucks. It doesn't suck, but it's just visually not inspiring. In an Unreal, you have the ability to render every single shot however long you want. You can render them all in 30 seconds, in a minute if you want. And then that allows you complete and absolute freedom to construct all of your scenes completely in editing, and to have an absolute freedom to go back, to change the order, to change the length of the shot at any given time. If you need more time, you can always just go back and re-render the shot because it only takes 5 seconds. So it's this incredibly opening experience, because my background is a kind of a CG generalist, and I've been very kind of, what's the freaking word? It'll come back. But I've been limited, let's say. I've been limited by just the limited thinking of a CG artist instead of a filmmaker, because I was always after this kind of image perfection in terms of technical quality. But that's not really what it's about if you want to be a filmmaker, if you want to be a director. It's more about the emotion and the story. So if this experience with Unreal allows me to explore that at a much, much faster rate and to have a much more creative experience with it and have much more fun with it, I'm very much happy to abandon a few technical glitches that you have in rendering with Unreal today, which are going to get ironed out sooner rather than later. So just for the end, looking ahead, I'll just take a swig of water. Kind of how I see the future of filmmaking, and this term has been used a lot, like, oh, Unreal is the future of filmmaking, and it is, in a lot of ways it is. You have the virtual production, you have the LED wall thing, there's a lot of use cases of how this software is taking filmmaking into the future. But what I specifically mean here is kind of how it ties in specifically with animation and how it kind of bridges that gap between live action and animation that was much bigger before than it is now. So if I take Irradiation, for example, and how this film was made, the typical process of kind of assembling the scenes and rendering, that takes a lot of time traditionally. And with Unreal, it sped up the process tenfold. Like, it's incomparable how fast I was able to make this, and I'm still trying to process that. But the one thing that hasn't sped up is the process of animation. And that's always going to be the case, no matter how good our motion capture systems are. You're always going to need to have an animator's touch to really dial in the performances. And especially like with stuff that's a bit more stylized. I'm usually working with animations that are more realistic, more akin to live action, but in something that's a bit more stylized, animation is always going to be there. Don't worry if you're an animator, the job is safe. But in terms of kind of optimizing the process, like how it changed the whole pipeline and how it sped up things, it's just like looking back and how, if we play this video as well, please. If we kind of look back at like how when I started, like rendering used to take a long ass time. Like it was like 15 hours per frame. And that's a very steep price to pay when you start out and you want to make images move. But now you have all of these incredible tools that are completely for free for everyone that are delivering real-time rendering and, you know, in the entire ecosystem around it that enables the beginner filmmakers to explore and to kind of find their voice at their own terms. But in kind of bridging this gap, imagine just for 1 minute if we had a perfect animation system that captured a perfect body and facial animation. We'll be able to shoot the shots on a shot-by-shot basis like live action. We would dump the shots at the end of the day, and then we would start editing the film the next day, instead of spending like weeks and weeks of cleaning up animation. So that's something that I kind of feel that is going to happen sooner rather than later again, and definitely at this speed of development, I think that that day is much, much closer than we all think. So this is my quick nervous ramble. I want to say thank you, everyone, for listening. And again, thank you to the organizers for having me here. And if anyone wants to get in touch, this is all my stuff. Feel free to take a photo of this, or if you ever want to get in touch regarding anything. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. I hope you enjoy this.
Thank you very much, Sava.
Thank you.
Now I will call you to ask questions if you have, as you see in the video and the process and everything. So feel free to ask whatever you want.
Yeah, anything you feel like asking, like, please feel free. No, there we go.
Hi, my name is Sonia and I'm a 3D artist basically. So yeah, I mean, I've been doing Unreal a little bit, but I'm most interested in how you did the lighting. I'm guessing you use the dynamic lighting.
It's all, yeah, sorry, finish your question.
Yeah, that's it basically.
Yeah, it's all dynamic lighting. So here's another thing in terms of my knowledge of Unreal. I think it's kind of like, it's a bit misleading to people when they see this and they're like, oh, like you know Unreal. Like I really don't. I really know the very basics of Unreal. I've played in it for maybe about a year and then I decided to make this. But my knowledge is very rudimentary. All I'm really doing is I'm using pre-made assets and environments. I know how to import animations. I know how to animate cameras, but if you know how to animate a camera in 3ds Max, you know how to do it in Blender and you know how to do it in Unreal. It's the same thing. And I know how to basically just move lights, which is really like, that's all I'm doing here. Like it's very, honestly, it's nothing crazy on a technical level. In terms of the actual lighting, I mean, all of it, you know, it's just a fog volume and kind of like maybe, I think this was, yeah, fog volume, a very low intensity sun, a soft top light, and a few area lights for picking up specific things. But it was very, very minimal and it was very kind of basic, I guess. Everything is, yeah, dynamic. Everything is done with ray tracing as well, if that makes sense. And this was done as actually in 4.26. Unreal 5 came out midway through the project and I was like, damn it. I tried to convert this into 5, but it didn't work. It worked, but it was the biggest kind of tease ever because it worked, the scenes worked, and it looked amazing. It looked way better than in 4.26, but every time I would render, it would just crash. So that sucked. That was like, I can see it and it looks amazing, but I can't use it. So I had to finish it in 4.26. And it's, you know, it's really, I think lighting really comes down to, it comes down to cinematography and photography. It's not really like at the technical level, it's just, you're just moving around lights, changing colors and intensity of them. But the kind of the photography or cinematography knowledge behind it, that's something that I would always suggest kind of people to dive deeper into if they want to make their images may have meaning, maybe. Yeah.
Thanks. I thought the process was maybe technically more difficult, or I don't know. But yeah, that's basically my questions.
No worries. It's really easy, honestly. Like Unreal, I think is probably the best. Like when it comes to 3D, I think it's probably the best way to learn lighting.
Yeah, it's good.
Just because you get that haptic feedback, you get everything immediately. You don't have to wait.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks.
No worries. More questions? Or we can just go, there's one.
Hey, thank you. This looks, amazing, really.
Thank you.
What about environment, the pipeline for environment, megascans?
No, so there's a little bit of megascans in there. The bulk of the environment is from Mavi, M-A-W-I. I think you just type that on Unreal Marketplace. And they have a lot of like forest biome environments. They have like whatever, birch, pine, and this one in particular is called the dead forest environment. So it has everything is dead and charred, which kind of tied in with the story really nicely. So it's all based on Unreal's landscape system, and everything is procedural, everything works. So that's why you can you have the initial setup that you can use straight off the bat, but if you decide to change things, you can like sculpt around, and all the trees and all the foliage will just follow the environment, and everything just works perfectly. So it's just a nice sandbox of kind of playing. But yeah, all of the environments are pre-made. I didn't make a single thing in this trailer. I made the reactor core blocks, the graphite blocks. That's the only asset that I made for this short. Everything else is pre-made. So yeah, all of the environments came from Mavi and a little bit from Quixel, not a lot. Go.
Hi.
Hello.
We follow your presentations religiously at this point. People from my faculty, amazing work as always. I wanted to ask, when you think of your scripts, have you ever considered, are there any Easter eggs that are connected? Do you have your own universe? Or when you think of a project, do you know, oh, I'll put this piece here, and like in a few projects next, I'll put something else? Are they connected or just connected for you? Or do you let your audience make the connection or just think for themselves? How do you approach your writing style in that?
Do you mean if it's connected to like other films or just
like just all of your projects, like from back when?
There's some overlapping themes, but they're not connected in terms of story. Like if you were to look at connection, I would say like a nice connection to make is maybe between IFCC and the Freight. Those two are, they're completely different stories, completely different worlds. They're not meant to be sequels or anything, but we always thought of Freight as being like a spiritual sequel to IFCC. In a lot of ways, like if in a trilogy sense, you would have your first film, which is that kind of grand opening of adventure, and then the second film would always be a little bit more darker. And that was kind of in the trilogy that we have in mind around that, like a metaphorical trilogy. Freight is kind of connected to IFCC just in that sense. It's like a spiritual sequel that just tells a much darker story. But all of them are fairly, standalone films. All of them are fairly, and every time they do tell kind of something personal. I'm not a writer. I'm not gonna pretend that I'm a writer. It's such a complicated profession. I do write a lot for my own stuff and for work, but I'm a director primarily. And I do love to work with stories, but the intricacies of screenwriting is something that's I wouldn't call myself, But yeah, the one thing that I know is just write what you know. That's always been the basis of every project that I do. Is it has to have an emotional core that's connected with something that I know, something that's familiar to me or near and dear to me, so that I know how to channel that into visuals, basically. So. Yeah, you can say there are Easter eggs here or there. They wouldn't be really Easter eggs. They're just clues to unraveling the story, let's say.
I remember vividly in the last CGA when somebody asked you to talk about Fright and what was it about, you said, it's up for you to decide.
Yeah, because I think that's still the case, really, because that's the, I think that's one of the wonderful things about film, you know, it's, or art in general, it's open to interpretation. I mean, if I were to, you know, lay it all out here and say, oh, this film was meaning that and that, I think that would devalue the experience a little bit, because maybe you would be like, oh, you know, like it's just, really? Like, that's what you meant? Like, you know, I think it, like, whenever filmmakers reveal that, it's not like it's a big secret or anything, but I think having kind of that room for interpretation is what makes it valuable, and arriving to different conclusions. Like, you don't have to arrive to you know, it's not important that you got what I wanted out of it. If it meant something for you, something different, that's even better, you know? So, yeah.
And can I add one more little question?
Yeah.
When it comes to Unreal, one thing that you absolutely love about it, like the tool, the feature that they have, and one thing that you would love for them to add.
What was the second thing?
What would you like for them to add? What would like speed up your workflow? You said
one thing that I love and like one thing that I want them to add. I just love the ability to play and the iteration speed. That's something I failed to mention because I failed to catch up with my video. But again, like in traditional animation pipelines, the process of actually getting your first edit out that has everything rendered, like that takes a long time. And getting that first edit out, like finally you get to see everything and see everything in context. And then you're like, oh, all right, so now I have to fix 50 things to progress this, basically. It's iteration. Like the more iteration you have whenever you're making a film or animation, especially, the more iteration time you have, the better the final result is going to be. So with traditional process, you're always constrained by time because you just don't have, you maybe have 1 or 2 passes to get the whole thing out, and that's it. But when Unreal, like all of those passes just happen intuitively. They happen as you're working. Like as I was showing that lighting process, like that's just, you know, you just set everything up, you see what works, what doesn't, and then you're like, all right, it's good. And then if you need to make a change, you're done in like 5 minutes. You know, it's not like 5 days compared to traditional. So that's probably still the most valuable aspect to me, is just the sheer iteration speed. It just allows you to have more time to iterate and to reach a better quality result. One thing I would like them to add, I wouldn't know, to be honest. Like it's, because like I said, like, which ties into the first question, I'm not really technical about Unreal, so I don't really know what's kind of missing. I don't know. I honestly wouldn't know, yeah. I'll just leave you hanging there, sorry.
They are just that good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Any more questions?
Yeah. Sava, would you ever consider directing live action movies in the future?
Yes, please.
Would you think that it would be really hard to put up with all these actor characters on the set? And, you know, like, is it easier for you actually to do it with virtual guys?
I don't know. I mean, virtual characters, you can place them everywhere. You can have them perform for 12 hours on a loop. It's, you know, you can throw them out, you can blow them up. I mean, honestly, like, yes, absolutely. Like, that's the reason why I started doing animation, is because I love film. I always loved film. It's always that same answer of kind of, oh, I always loved film when I was a kid, but I never knew that I could actually be doing this. And then through a lot of work, I actually stumbled upon and started directing. So that kind of opened up a lot of doors. Animation is wonderful, but animation has always been, I kind of look at it as kind of my way to go into live action. I still love animation. I would love to do an animated feature as well, but my end goal or my long-term goal is to work with live action feature films.
Yeah, but you would have a lot of CG for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big stickler for CG, honestly. It's you know, it's a pain. but yeah, I mean, my tastes in films definitely lie in genre films, sci-fi and horror, especially cosmic horror. So I would imagine that there would be some visual effects in there for sure, but you know, I'm not thinking about, you know, the big tentpole Star Warses and whatnots. I'm kind of drawn to more simple stories. So, yeah.
Since we're having here a lot of students, and I was wondering how have you learned the part of your directing job is to know very well the film language, you know, like all the stuff that makes one film, you know, like where have you learned that from, and where would you suggest people? Is that something that is done only by watching movies, or you really had to dive deeper into some kind of theoretical knowledge or whatever sources that you used?
I don't know. I mean, it depends, I think, on you, and depends on who you are and how you like to work. I kind of learned by doing, and I think that's always going to be, you know, personal taste and personal choice. I always learn by doing. It's never. I just recently started reading books about screenwriting, so I've never read any book about any of this stuff ever. It was just something that was, you know, fun for me, and I just kind of learned by doing, by a long, grueling process of doing. I think that's the best way to learn as well, because you'll make all the mistakes, and those mistakes are going to hurt, but you'll never make them again. But it really works both ways. I mean, if you like books, you'll find certain books to be useful for you, and you'll definitely find awesome information in there. But I think, like, you know, there's really no book or no lecture or no interview or whatever that can, you know, make you into a filmmaker. You have to make a film, and by like the action of repeating it, you'll kind of figure out after a few years, you'll be like, oh, this is the kind of stuff I like, or oh, this is the kind of films that I like, or the kind of filmmaker I want to be. So I think in a way you absolutely have to, you know, books are nice, and all of the information is very much welcomed, but I think in a way you can't do it unless you actually make it, unless you actually sit down and start making a film. So I would encourage, again, I know it's kind of, it's scary, it is a little bit scary, but I think especially nowadays, and especially with Unreal, the price of admission, again, has never been cheaper, and you can learn all of this on your own terms, in your own house. Nobody has to see you fail. You can fail privately. You can fail privately for 5 years and never put anything out, but you can learn. And then 5 years later, when you accumulate a little bit of knowledge, then you'll be like, all right, I'm happy to put this out there. And I think that's, you know, that's a completely valid way to learn. And especially, you know, it's not even animation. It's you know, filmmaking in general, or live action. You know, imagine like 20 years ago, if you wanted to dive into film, I mean, cameras were non-existent, you know? If you want to get an actual film camera and film reels, like, that was expensive as hell. Now you just get your iPhone or a DSLR or whatever. Like, there's amazing DSLRs. There's DSLRs out there that have been used to shoot feature films. So, I mean, if they can do it, you can do it as well. But you have all of this stuff available, and it's, you know, it's never been better for diving into this. And it's only gonna get even more better, you know? So, yeah.
Thank you, Sava. It's amazing what you did. It's just, I have just one question that's not directly related. Do you think that in the future we're going to go to the theater and there will be holographic projections instead of actors, for example?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you think that in the future there will be holograms instead of actors in the future, in the real theater? This is just to end on.
Oh, there'll be holograms for sure, yeah. No, I honestly have not. Like working with hologram instead of an actor. Sure, potentially. Yeah, I mean, they've done that already with, you know, stage performances and stuff. They brought back Michael Jackson. They brought back Tupac. They brought back, who else did they bring back? Maybe one day they'll be able to do that, and you can actually stand next to it and shoot it in the same shot, and you wouldn't tell the difference between the real person and the hologram. If that happens, that's, you know, a lot of VFX artists are gonna be hurt by that, for sure. But yeah, possibly. possibly, yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
I was wondering, when you were just starting out, when you were beginning, how did you go about promoting your stuff and promoting yourself?
Oh, when I started out, yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one because it's similar to my previous answer. Is like you just open up as many different social media as you can, and you just start posting, and it's super awkward at first, and you're like, hi, I made this, and then after a while, it kind of becomes, it's one of those things that needs to grow, and your confidence in it needs to grow as well. I think one of the things that really helped me as well is I always say this is an old article at this point, I think, but the guys who run Short of the Week, which is a kind of short film curatorial website, they have an article of how they've launched their short film, Thomas Biel Cypher, I think, and that was kind of the blueprint that I used for all of my kind of launch tactics, because when you make a short or any kind of project really, but a short film in particular, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, it's a team effort, it's not just yourself, there's a lot of people who devoted their time to it. So you definitely want to see it succeed, or at least like reach a certain level of engagement or views or whatever, and you can't just put it online and hope for the best, hope for the algorithm to pick it up. You have to support it in a lot of ways. I didn't make this kind of comparison, but a lot of people said like it's like raising a child in a way. I'm not a father, so I don't know. But a lot of people compare it to raising a child, like you're like as you're making it, like you're kind of raising your little kid, and then when you put it out, you have to support it. You have to kind of help it kind of stand on its feet. But then after a while, it grows up, and you just have to let it go and have to kind of, see it live its own kind of life online. But that kind of supporting it, like that's a lot of work. That really is a lot of work. And like even with this now, I finally just relaxed because I've been like spamming nonstop for 3 weeks with this one. And it's a lot of work. And you have to have a clear plan of, all right, it goes live at this point, and then you have to do your research if you're shooting for Vimeo or YouTube. When's the best time to put it up on YouTube, or when's the best time to put it up on Vimeo? Typically it's early Monday morning because that means it has the whole week to kind of snowball, and it has the whole week for all the blogs and everybody to pick it up potentially. Then you have specific websites, or you have to target a specific website which might be interested to your film. If your film is something like this, there are specific websites that might find it interesting, but there's others that might not. So you have to do the research ahead of time and see who might be interested. So when the day comes and when you're putting it out, you have to use all of your resources to put it out everywhere at once, because that gives you the biggest kind of chance of it kind of snowballing and reaching that critical mass that takes it the rest of the way. I don't know if that answers the question. I think in general, like promotion and stuff, it's all about, you open up as many social media platforms as you can. You follow people whose work you really like. You try to engage with them. Through that engagement, you gain a little bit of confidence, I think, or you gain a little bit of online jargon or whatever. And yeah, after a while, it kind of becomes. After a while, you don't think about it, I think. I mean, it's not really, it's not something. I wouldn't say like I'm good at it, but it's just something that you just forget about it, because that's not as important in the long run. Like your work is. So if the work is really good, it'll eventually get there. So yeah.
So it was more of you pushing it forward than like people naturally taking a notice of it?
No, so you definitely push it forward at the start. You have to. Like you just have to give it all the momentum that you can. But then once that's done, that means that it's just going to be available to a lot more people. A lot more people are going to share it. Once, like if I share it myself versus if I and my whole team that worked on the film share it, that just means more people are going to see it. And then that means that all of those people, like in the secondary circle, they're all going to share it potentially, or some of them. but that just, you know, it spreads the kind of the engagement of it. And that has to, you know, it's a tactic that kind of you have to do that if you want to kind of reach that critical mass that really kind of helps the algorithm or the natural kind of process really kick off. So, yeah.
It's basically two phases of work. One, you work on the project, and then you work on promoting.
It's like a lot of people, yeah, that's the thing. Like a lot of people really underestimate the amount of prep time you have to do for your launch. Because you don't have, you know, like you think of any big film, like there's literal like marketing agencies and stuff and people who are supporting that, but you just have to do everything yourself here. So you have to use the tools, you know, to your own advantage and the tools that you have at your disposal. What I always do is, again, like there's a lot of things in that article that I think are really useful, but I always do, like I don't have a website yet. I'm way too lazy to build a website, and especially with free services like Behance. But I have a Behance page that I keep updated very regularly with all of my projects. And every time I do a short film, I make sure that I do a big breakdown on Behance, a big write-up, some behind-the-scenes material. I always tend to make a process video which explains the process, and then you offer up a lot more for your viewers, and you offer up a lot more value because now you have, you know, people saw the film. That's just something that I always want. Like when I see something that's freaking awesome, I always want like, oh, like, you know, I want to see how it was made. I want to see some more material, but usually there's none. And by offering that to people who are interested, then they can go check your Behance and they can see whatever the stuff you have there. Then they can see the process video, and then with this newfound knowledge of how the film was made, oh, maybe they'll go watch it again. So you have kind of the repeated kind of views there as well. And it's all about that, I think, just kind of, it provides just more value for the viewer. I love the process of this. I can talk about this for days. I love the process of filmmaking. So I love to share that every time. So it's kind of natural to me. If it's not something that, you know, that excites you or that, you know, it just, maybe it's not worth doing. I think there's plenty of people out there who just do amazing work, and, you know, that's all it takes, really. So, yeah. It's very subjective, I would say.
I agree. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, I have one question which may have a short answer. Now, since you entered Unreal and you experienced it and you liked it, are you going to go back to the traditional processes of animation or any other software that you used in animated movies?
As David Lynch would say, no. No. It's kind of a twofold answer. Unreal is really, at the moment, Unreal is really a scene assembly and rendering and cinematography software. You still need a lot of other software to make it work. So you still need whatever you're doing your animation in. You still need Maya, you still need Blender or Max or whatever. All of the effects, or most of the effects in Irradiation were done in 3ds Max. We have this plugin called Tyflow, so all of the physics simulations. So without that, I wouldn't be able to have that. So there is still plenty of uses for me, but as my primary kind of, you know, filmmaking tool, I think Unreal is definitely the way to go, and I'm never going back. There are particular, like Blender, I absolutely love Blender. I started using Blender maybe a couple of years ago. But for my client work at Axis, I tend to do a lot of previs myself, and Blender is, I think, by far the best tool for previs because it offers similar kind of real-time rendering with Eevee, which is kind of the viewport renderer, but you get all of the advantages of a 3D software, like you can easily model or rig anything in seconds, which is very difficult to do in Unreal. So Blender is something that I'll definitely keep on using for a while. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, if there is none, I would like to thank you.
Thank you.
And hope to see some more projects in Unreal or whatever.
Thank you. More are definitely coming. It's become super easy. So
okay.
That's a lie. It's really hard still, but it's more are definitely coming.
We are waiting for a live action movie also from you.
Hopefully soon.
Okay, thank you everyone. We are finishing for today and hope to see you tomorrow.
Cool. Thank you.